One of the most commonly agreed upon theories in the Five Nights at Freddy's community is the theory that Mike Schmidt, the protagonist of Five Nights at Freddy's 1, is Michael Afton, the protagonist of Sister Location and FNAF 6. However, ever since the FNAF movie came out with Mike Schmidt as the protagonist, and he wasn't William Afton's son, or well, we don't know that for sure, he still could be, but as of now, he is not confirmed to be, I've seen a surprising amount of people say that Mike Schmidt is also not Michael Afton in the games. Like, I've seen people say, oh, it was never confirmed in the games that Mike Schmidt is Afton's son. And honestly, it kind of confuses me because Mike being Mike is a theory with such hard evidence that I think it's just one of the things that we should maybe accept as fact. And I don't really say that about any other theories, I believe, except like, I don't know, maybe Will Trap. So join me as I clear up something that we should have all agreed upon a long time ago. And not only that, but I'll explain why Michael is the FNAF 4 protagonist as well, since I know the community consensus is still that we play as the crying child during the nighttime segments. And I've always wanted to make a video about that too. And it does rely on Michael being Mike Schmidt, so may as well just throw it in here. Before we delve into these very likely theories, I just want to really quickly ask you guys to subscribe. I'm trying to hit 3K before the end of the year, and subscribe would help me out a ton, but only if you enjoy the video. If you want to unsubscribe at any time, you can. So, what is the evidence for Mike being Mike? Holy shit, this is gonna get confusing. Well, there's the name for one. Mike is a nickname for Michael, and you'll never guess what the protagonist of Sister Location's name is. What's important to remember is that at the time of Sister Location's release, there are only 3 named characters in the game's storyline. Mike Schmidt, Jeremy Fitzgerald, and Fritz Smith. I guess we can count William too, even though he wasn't officially named until Sister Location. I find it extremely unlikely that the protagonist of FNAF 1 sharing the name as the protagonist of Sister Location is a coincidence. There's also no way Jeremy and Fritz being the name of the MCI victims is a coincidence either, but that's besides the point. But Zeto, he calls himself Michael, not Mike. Yeah, this is something people actually use to try and debunk the theory. You're right, he does, but this doesn't matter, like, at all. Since we see on hand unit the name Mike, and Michael is told to enter his name as seen above the keypad, I mean, the implication is pretty clear. I'm surprised that, okay, this is like a whole rant, this is totally off script. I'm genuinely so surprised that the player of Sister Location being Mike Schmidt was not like the most popular like opinion after that fucking scene. I know there are definitely people who thought like the player character was Mike, but there were people who thought that, it was like totally different person, or that it was like fucking some weird Michael Brooks. There's also the idea that William was Mike Schmidt and this whole thing. I'm genuinely just so surprised. Like, there are definitely people who put it together, don't get me wrong, but I'm surprised it just didn't take off more, man. I just had to like get that out there. And in the Five Nights at Freddy's Survival Logbook, we see that the book is owned by someone named Mike, who is undoubtedly Michael Afton. So yeah, he goes by Mike too, who would have fucking guessed. But wait, Michael Brooks, I hear you say. In case you don't know, in the novel trilogy, there's a character named Michael Brooks, who possesses Golden Freddy. So at the time of Sister Location's release, Scott has already named multiple characters Mike/Michael, but the Silver Eyes is a different continuity from the games. It's also possible that Scott was trying to connect the name Michael to Golden Freddy because of FNAF 4, but I'll talk about that later. Maybe Brooks is like some weird adaptation of Michael Afton. That could explain why the Golden Freddy's kid's name is changed in the games, because he isn't Golden Freddy, but probably not. He probably just changed it because it would be weird to have the main character also be the name of one of the missing kids. Zeto, wait, he didn't change the name Jeremy and Fritz for the MCI victims. Yeah, I wonder if there's like a deeper connection between Jeremy and Fritz sharing the names with the security guards. You should watch my Jeremy and Fritz video. Or maybe it's all just a coincidence. Although if Brooks' name being Michael is a coincidence, that doesn't mean Mike Afton being named Mike is one, since I'm sure if Sky's making an entry in the game's timeline, in the game story, he'll be thinking about that story's characters. And again, there are only 3 named characters in the game before Sister Location, but that's not all. Sister Location was made in part to explain FNAF 4's story.
Other ones, yeah, there were mysteries. 4 ended up just too mysterious to the point where you really couldn't, there was no real way to figure out what was going on. And a lot of people unsatisfied. And like I said, with jumping from 3 to 4, I knew that I had to go in and straighten that out. It's like, people aren't really happy with this. I need to make another game. I need to kind of ground this again, not necessarily in reality, but I need to ground it in kind of storytelling.
And here's what a lot of people may not know. Mike Schmidt was already an important part of FNAF 4's story. In fact, he was our player. Now, to a lot of people who watch my channel regularly, you're probably already like, yeah, no shit. But I know the community at large still thinks that in FNAF 4, we play as the crying child from the minigames during the nightmares. But this is most likely incorrect, and has been since the game came out. No, it was not a fucking retcon, I'll get to that later. And it all comes down to this audio file heard in game. This is actually Ralph's phone call from FNAF 1 Night 1. And Scott Cawthon himself said that there were no random Easter eggs, meaning this has lore significance. Oh, but wait, wasn't FNAF 4's original story Dream Theory before Scott retconned it, and this was just another hint to the theory? Yeah, well, it probably fucking wasn't, because it seems very likely that Dream Theory was never Scott's original intention with Five Nights at Freddy's 4, and I've made an entire video going over that, so make sure to check that out for further clarification. So if Dream Theory isn't canon, then that means this audio file, which however we know has some level of importance, must have a different meaning. The player must have heard it, and there's only two people we know of at this point who would have heard this call, Ralph or Mike Schmidt. Ralph is fucking dead, and we know from the week before that he doesn't have the nightmares. Also, it would be weird to play as him in FNAF 4 since he's not related to the story at all, so that leaves Mike Schmidt. And how does Mike Schmidt play into the story? Well, he can't be the crying child since he died years before FNAF 1. Yes, he died years before FNAF 1, so that means Mike has to be someone else, and probably the older brother. The player is clearly put in the position of a child, probably connected to the child we play as in the minigames. I mean, obviously the minigames are going to be connected to the plot of the game, which would make sense if the protag bullied a child, which eventually led to that child's death, and, you know, he felt guilt over it, so then in their nightmares, they are put in the position of a child being tormented, bullied, by the animatronics which mirrored the masked bullies. I mean, sure, he could technically be any of the bullies, or anyone else, I guess, but come on, guys, I don't need hard evidence to prove he's the brother. There are just some gaps that we should be able to logically fill in ourselves. Also, like, why would the player be some rando and not the second most important character in the minigames? Further evidence for the player being Mike Schmidt is that FNAF 4's gameplay mirrors FNAF 1. Nightmare Fredbear is also one of the final bosses in this game, which admittedly works well with the crying child being the player, but if it's the older brother, then he is facing his guilt head on, as he is facing the thing that killed his brother. Also, consider this, the nightmare continues after the crying child's death. He dies in the Night 6 minigame, but there are 8 nights in the game. At this point, the game can't be a coma or whatever since he is dead. Why continue the game if the protagonist has died, unless he didn't actually die because he wasn't the protagonist? So, when FNAF 4 came out, we were playing as Mike Schmidt, who is the older brother facing probably guilt-ridden nightmares. Oh, and Shadow Freddy is there too. Watch my FNAF 4 video. Now you might be wondering, why would Scott make it so we play as Mike in FNAF 4? Why suddenly give this character relevance? Well, more relevance outside of being the first playable character in the series, I guess. And what's the narrative purpose of playing as him? Well, there are a couple possible reasons. FNAF 4 was made to be the final game in the series, so it's possible Scott just wanted to call back to the beginning by having us play as Mike again, and then he gave him this origin story to justify it. You know, really try and bring it full circle type of thing. Now, personally, if I was in Scott's position, I would have just made the FNAF 3 guard be the player, since that guy was left unnamed in the previous game. You can do basically anything with him, and he was the one who went up against the killer. There's also the Happiest Day plotline, which is heavily connected to the crying child, so the crying child is plot relevant to that game, and I also do believe William was the father of Foxy Bro and the crying child, so it would be like a family reunion of sorts, but whatever. Maybe Mike is the FNAF 3 guard, who knows. As for the story reason we play as him, it really depends on your interpretation of FNAF 4's story. What I think is most likely going on is that the crying child's memories went on to influence the rest of the story, and in the gameplay Mike is haunted by the memory of his brother and his guilt of killing him. It basically just further explores the idea of his memories leaving an effect. But I explained all this more in depth in my Dream Theory video. And all of this is just using FNAF 4. There's more evidence after the game's release. There's Sister Location, which was made after people were unsatisfied and confused with FNAF 4's storytelling. One of the first things we learn in this game is that our player character is named Mike. It's almost like Mike was an important character in the last game, but no one understood it, so he calls it out right at the beginning of Sister Location that Mike is important to this story. And as we know, we play as Mike Afton in this game, which just rounds back to Mike Afton being Mike Schmidt. And in the Five Nights at Freddy's Survival Logbook, which was previously owned by Michael Afton, he draws Nightmare Fredbear after being asked about recent dreams. Furthermore, in the movie, Mike Schmidt has dreams related to his brother. He also feels guilt for his brother's death. Very similar to Michael Afton, who also feels guilt for his brother's death. Maybe he had dreams related to his brother too. So yeah, it seems very likely that Mike Schmidt is the FNAF 4 player and is Michael Afton. Also, can we just stop this whole thing? I see this thing where people are like, well, maybe Mike is only the player on night 5, 6, 7, and 8. No, dude, the phone call is on every night. You know, he's the player for every night, alright? Hey guys, there's actually one more piece of evidence I forgot to talk about for why Mike Schmidt is Michael Afton. So this is something that's gone pretty much unnoticed, but might have gotten popularity recently thanks to Hyperdroid. Basically, the Toradora March plays during Demolition Inevitable, which is the song that plays during Mike's speech at the end of Sister Location. So, let me get this straight. There's this scene that's all about Mike and his journey, and then there's the Toradora March that plays. I wonder what that could be implying, guys. What could that mean? The implication, I think, is pretty clear. Now, there is one last thing I have to talk about. If Mike Afton is Mike Schmidt, why isn't Mike in Afton in the movies? Oh, I guess I should also talk about why Mike would change his last name to Schmidt in FNAF 1. It could just be like that's his legal name now, or like he's just trying to like be, you know, disassociated from his father is probably what was going on there. As for why he's not in Afton the movies, well, I don't know. Scott probably just wanted to change it to tell a different story. Things change in adaptations all the time, and either way, Mike Schmidt is still an adaptation of Michael Afton's character. It's just showing his life under different circumstances, and it makes sense for his last name to be Schmidt in the movies if he isn't in Afton, since that's the last name he used in the games. Hell, even if another character is introduced and he is named Michael Afton, it doesn't mean Mike Schmidt and Michael Afton are separate in the games. Scott would just be splitting up the characters basically, which is another thing that happens in adaptations. I know Matthew Lillard said the movies fill in blanks from the game's story, but that doesn't necessarily mean everything is gonna line up. And Mike Schmidt being Mike Afton is one of the most commonly agreed upon theories, so it's possible Scott would change it and trust the community wouldn't get the wrong idea. Scott should never trust the community, is what this video is really about. So, what do you guys think? Is Mike Schmidt Michael Afton the FNAF 4 player? 99% of you are going to agree. I'm sure most of you guys already believe these theories, but I know not everyone does, so I thought I would make this to hopefully convince them, or maybe like inform them if they're not aware of the theory. It's very rare that I make a video to convince anyone. I think the only other time I've done this was like the Mike Fritz video and the FNAF 3, the old FNAF 3 guard video, and well, I disagree with both of those now, so we'll see how this turns out. This is just a special occasion. Let me know if I convinced you in the comments if you were one of like 0.025% of people who didn't believe this theory coming in. And while you're down there, make sure to subscribe for more Five Nights at Freddy's videos, not just theories. I'm gonna start making like, you know, other type of content. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.